11-year-old Ricky Stetson went for an evening run on a jogging trail in Portland, Maine. Witnesses recalled seeing the boy and a young man right behind him on a bicycle. The next day, Ricky Stetson's body was discovered in a nearby ravine. He had been murdered. The killer left very few clues, but he left behind something he couldn't hide: his signature. 11-year-old Ricky Stetson and his family lived in a working-class section of Portland, Maine, a coastal city known primarily as a summer vacation destination. Around 8 p.m. on August 23, 1983, Ricky went for a short run along a biking and jogging path called Black Cove. He never returned home. His body was discovered the next day in a grassy area just off the jogging path.
There was evidence, both externally and internally, as I recall, of asphyxiation, that is, of choking around the neck. And it appeared to the medical examiner as though he was choked manually and probably by a ligature.
He had also been stabbed. The autopsy revealed that the boy had not been sexually assaulted, but there were bite wounds on various parts of his body. And the bite marks had been gouged with a knife.
None of the forensic dentists had seen a case before in which there had been a bite mark with slashing and cutting through it as if to hide the bite mark. And so that's what the law calls a signature crime. That is, it is done in a way that is very unique, that is very unusual, that the culprit, the perpetrator, is leaving, as it were, his signature on the crime.
To Portland police, Ricky Stetson's murder appeared similar to a series of knifings that occurred 2 years earlier in the Oakdale section of the city. Michael Witham was just 9 years old when he had an encounter with the so-called Oakdale slasher.
There's a wooded lot between a couple of houses which have a couple of paths, and I was called into the wooded lot by a guy who I didn't know at the time. He had asked me a few questions: my age, my name, where I lived, and after I had asked his questions, he said I could leave. As I turned to leave, he grabbed me and cut my throat.
Witham got away, but the injury was just inches from being fatal and required 12 stitches to close. All Witham could say was the attacker was a white male in his late teens or early 20s. That description was similar to the one of the man seen riding his bicycle behind Ricky Stetson. For a full year, police searched for the killer, and eventually they identified a suspect, 24-year-old Joseph Anderson. He was also a suspect in the attempted murder of a 9-year-old girl. But there was a problem. Police in Bellevue, Nebraska had a similar murder. A 13-year-old boy with stab wounds and markings identical to Ricky Stetson's. If the Nebraska murder was related to the Stetson case in Maine, Joseph Anderson wasn't the killer. A serial murderer was on the loose on a 1,500-mile killing spree. In the fall of 1983, police in Bellevue, Nebraska were searching for a missing 13-year-old boy, Danny Joe Eberly. Danny Joe had been delivering newspapers early one Sunday morning when he mysteriously disappeared.
He's partially through his paper route and now has disappeared. And he wasn't with any of his playmates, any of his relatives, wasn't in any of the neighborhoods, and we knew something was terribly wrong right then.
Danny Joe's bicycle was found in front of a home he delivered newspapers to, but there was no sign of a struggle and no sign of the boy.
Danny's bicycle. His brother and sister and his mother and dad said his whole life was that bicycle. That's why he delivered newspapers, to buy accessories and to keep the bicycle shining. He was really proud of it.
Police searched for Danny Joe Eberly across the state of Nebraska. His picture was seen on nightly television programs and in the newspapers. 3 days later, investigators' worst fears were realized. Danny Joe Eberly's body was found on a desolate stretch of road 4 miles from his bicycle. He had been stabbed to death. The town's mayor, Joe Baldwin, personally delivered the news to the boy's mother.
We broke the news to her, and we were all crying, including the FBI guy. He was crying, and I was crying. The chief was crying. A very traumatic type thing to tell some woman, your son was found and he's dead. The most traumatic thing I think I've ever done.
Danny Joe Eberly's hands and feet were tied with rope, and a star-shaped pattern had been cut into his chest, but there was no sign of sexual assault. Police turned to FBI behavioral analyst Robert Ressler for a psychological profile of the killer.
We had a biter, an individual that was compelled to bite his victims and then cutting the flesh away to deny that evidence to the police.
Since the body was found so close to the road, Ressler suspected the killer was slightly built and not strong enough to carry the body very far. The location also told Ressler that the killer was inexperienced.
And it was right off the side of the road, really would indicate to me that the killer was in a little state of panic, wanted to get rid of the body, didn't want to be found with the body in the car, but wasn't sophisticated or knowledgeable enough about the area to do it effectively. And it would indicate to me possibly that this may have been the first time that he had killed in this particular area.
The rope used to bind Danny Joe Eberly was of particular interest to investigators and was sent to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Special Agent Wayne Oakes conducted the analysis.
I had never seen anyone like this. None of the other examiners in the laboratory who deal with ropes on a daily basis over a number of years had ever seen a rope like this.
The outside of the rope was common white nylon, but the inner core was extremely unusual. There were 24 different types of fibers and 106 different colored yarns. There were polyesters, nylons, rayons, acrylics, polyethylenes, wools, and cottons, which is what made the rope unique. Oakes took the rope to the National Cordage Institute, a trade association of all rope manufacturers in the United States. Their technical experts had never seen a rope like this either. Back in Bellevue, Nebraska, police were desperate to find the killer of Danny Joe Eberly, and parents were warned to keep a close eye on their children.
People are reluctant to let their children out to go sledding or skating or any of the normal activities. Children are watched over at shopping centers. The parents are keeping a very tight rein on their children for their safety.
Despite the precautions, the unthinkable happened again. Another young boy, 12-year-old Christopher Walden, was abducted as he walked to school.
It was about 8 blocks from his house, again in Bellevue, and he was at a 4-way stop when a young man came up and forced him into the car and drove off with him.
In the sub-zero temperatures, police searched for Christopher Walden. 3 days later, a group of pheasant hunters stumbled upon a snow-covered figure. Christopher Walden's frozen body was found in the same area as Danny Joe Eberly's. Like Danny Joe, Walden had been stabbed to death, and he had the same star-shaped pattern etched on his body. Two sets of footprints led into the woods where Christopher Walden's body was discovered, but only one set of footprints left the scene. an indication the killer did not have an accomplice. The star-shaped pattern told investigators that this was the same individual who killed Danny Joe Eberly 3 months earlier. Witnesses saw Christopher Walden with a young white male in his early 20s on the walkway near the school. From those descriptions, police created a composite drawing, which was distributed to newspapers and local television stations. Robert Ressler refined his profile of the killer with information gathered from the second murder.
I felt that the individual, because of this need to be close to young males and having an attraction for them, that he would be involved in some sort of activities with youth. Soccer coach, baseball coach, Boy Scouts.
Since the killer was using a knife to obscure the bite wounds, Ressler suspected that the killer read police and detective magazines because matching bite wounds to a dental impression is often discussed in these types of publications. Police talked to a woman who was walking her dog near the intersection at the time Christopher Walden was abducted. She thought she saw the abduction, but she wasn't entirely sure. So police asked her to undergo hypnosis. Hypnosis can sometimes help a witness to recall details of an event they can't otherwise remember, but hypnotically enhanced recollections are usually not admissible in court.
She underwent hypnosis, and something came out in the session, and it was just driving her crazy, and it all came back to her. And that's when she realized that she had seen Christopher Walden being kidnapped.
She said that Christopher Walden was with a man who was approximately the same height. The car leaving the scene was brown. The license number started with the letter R, followed by a series of numbers. Sheriff Patrick Thomas issued a challenge to the killer during a news conference.
And I think that the individual who's responsible for these acts is very sick, spineless, a coward, and I would urge him to call a minister or a priest or me. There was a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking from then on that maybe this shouldn't have been done, or maybe whatever. But I felt that that I would see what he's made of, because I knew that he was watching the press, he was watching TV, he was monitoring us as much as they do. That's part of their profile, that's part of their MO. And I figured that maybe he would make a mistake.
And it worked. A local woman, Barbara Weaver, told friends that she had been praying for the capture of the serial murderer, and she did something else. In her prayers, she offered herself in any way possible to help find the killer. Barbara Weaver worked in a daycare center, and she usually arrived at work early to get her classroom ready. When she looked outside, she noticed a strange car in the parking lot. The driver was wearing a ski cap and looked similar to the composite drawings of the killer she saw on television. As she was writing down the license plate number, the man entered the classroom. He threatened to kill her and pulled a knife. Mrs. Weaver ran past him and fled to the house next door, which belonged to the pastor of the church. From there, she called police.
She writes down his license tag. That's the first thing she did. Sharp woman. And but the fact of it is, she got to say, when she saw the car, she said, that looks like the car of this killer. Remember, this is all that's on everyone's mind. This is the biggest case they've ever had in Nebraska.
Police tracked the license plate number to a 19-year-old enlisted man stationed at Offutt Air Force Base. His name was John Joubert. Joubert was a maintenance mechanic in the radar unit. He was also an Eagle Scout and was an assistant scout leader for a local troop. Joubert denied having anything to do with the two murders. But there was an interesting coincidence. Joubert had been living in Portland, Maine the year before at the time of Ricky Stetson's murder. When John Joubert was questioned about the murders of Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden, he had little to say to investigators. But he fit the FBI's profile of the killer. He was 19 years old, slightly built, and an Eagle Scout who volunteered his time as an assistant scout leader of a local troop. Joubert read softcore pornography and detective magazines, which were found in his footlocker at the Air Force Base. But what police found in his automobile was of particular interest. On the right floorboard was a brown Caucasian head hair, which was sent to the FBI for analysis.
A microscopic examination of the question hairs found from the vacuum sweepings in the vehicle with the known standards from the victim, they were the same microscopically. And I indicated in my report that the hairs in the vehicle were consistent head hairs from the victim, Danny Joe Eberly.
Police also found a knife and a roll of tape. And in Joubert's automobile was a piece of rope. At first, it appeared to be common nylon rope, similar to the type sold in thousands of retail outlets throughout the United States. But inside the rope was a surprise.
The core of the rope was so unique with 106 different fibers in there. Every single one of those fibers was mounted on a glass microscope, and the generic class of fiber was identified to make sure that they were the same color, composition, diameter, cross-sectional shape, and to make sure that the acetates matched the acetates and the polyethylenes matched the polyethylenes. I found that they were identical in all respects. Microscopically, instrumentally, chemical tests, there were no differences between the two ropes.
Joubert had no idea the rope was so rare. He said he had been given the rope years earlier in the Boy Scouts. When confronted with the evidence, Joubert confessed.
He said, "Let me tell you about the second boy first, because it's fresher in my mind." And we started questioning him, and he told us and provided us with facts concerning the killings and the abduction of both boys that would only be known to the individual that had committed the crimes.
Joubert also admitted that he was the Oakdale slasher, and his attacks on people like Michael Witham were practice for his subsequent killing spree. He also revealed that after killing Danny Joe Eberly, he walked into a McDonald's restaurant, washed the blood from his hands in the men's room, and ordered some breakfast. After the Christopher Walden murder, Joubert said he attended a Boy Scout meeting where he was an assistant troop leader. At that meeting, the troop discussed the abductions.
Yeah, well, guys, you know, as long as you look out for each other, you have nothing to worry about. Okay?
After 116 days and one of the most intensive manhunts in Nebraska history, police finally had their killer, and Portland, Maine had theirs as well. In Maine, Joubert was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Ricky Stetson. In Nebraska, for the murders of Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden, Joubert was convicted and sentenced to death.
I specifically asked him if he disliked the boys, and his statement was, "How could I dislike him? I didn't even know him."
No one knows what drove John Joubert to kill.
And I remember one day I said, "John, if I let you out of jail today and just let you walk away from here, do you think you've learned now that you would never do that again?" And he says, he thought for quite some time, and he says, no, he says, "I don't think I could help myself." I says, "Do you mean you'd go kill another little boy?" "Yeah, probably," he said. "Yeah, I probably would."
On July 17th, 1996, John Joubert was put to death in the electric chair. Joubert's presence is still felt to this day in the small town of Bellevue. Former Mayor Joe Baldwin regularly visits the victims' graves and remembers the 116 days when a serial killer stalked his community.
Most horrible thing that ever happened in this city, you know, to have a young person like that, 2 young persons, and even 3 when you talk about, to have their life taken away by a person like that, I think that is terrible. You can't believe how traumatic it is when that happens.
Just the other day in the grocery store, a lady said that she's just fearful of her little boy playing after dark, that she remembers Jubert. And she says, and I don't know how to instill in him that it may happen again. And I told her I'd hope and pray to never it happen again, but make sure she keeps an eye on her little boy.
You just have to be careful. Children have to be very careful. There are people out there that prey on them.